So what you begin to see as crisis subsides is a circumstance of a return to a more normal kind of political situation in which the other political actors work to reestablish their standing. And this, by the way, is extraordinarily important and is not very widely understood as a feature of American political history. Look, almost any school child knows that because of war or crisis, you get powerful presidents. You get your Lincoln, your Woodrow Wilson, your Franklin Roosevelt, and eventually your George W. Bush. And then there is this sense that, well, that's not true of normal political times. We've got these heroic figures, and then we've got normal times. And so what happens is after the crisis is met, circumstances devolve slowly and collegially back to the status quo ante bellum, the way things were before. It's just everybody understands, all right, we're going to go back to where we were before. That's not what happens. Look at the history of the episodes of immediate post-crisis periods. Who are the presidents who are serving during that period of time? Andrew Johnson, who's impeached, right? Why is Andrew Johnson impeached? There's a lot of historical discussion about this, but from my perspective, the important thing is Andrew Johnson is attempting to carry over into the post-war period the kind of enlarged presidency that Abraham Lincoln had had, and he didn't succeed at it. Lincoln, in fact, had gotten his hands slapped during the course of the Civil War when he had attempted to devise a framework for allowing the southern states to return back into the Union. Even Lincoln himself, when he attempted to carry over his wartime powers, or was perceived by Congress to be carrying over his wartime powers into the post-war period, got his hands slapped. Lincoln devised in late 1863 a formula for allowing the southern states back into the Union that strongly aggravated Capitol Hill. They passed a law opposed to Lincoln's provisions. Lincoln pocket vetoed that, and there was an enormous uproar in Capitol Hill, unlike anything else that happened during the Civil War, which resulted in the Wade-Davis Manifesto, named after the two principal sponsors of the bill on Capitol Hill. The Wade-Davis Manifesto basically accused Lincoln of attempting to exercise the powers of a dictator. We understand that we have to allow you enormous power to win the war, but don't you dare think that you can exercise these powers into the peacetime. Then comes Andrew Johnson. Johnson attempts to do the same thing. Johnson is trying to maintain a presidency of Lincoln-esque proportions after the Southern surrender, and Congress is going to have nothing to do with it. And so if you look at the articles of impeachment against Andrew Johnson, most of it is a screed against his inability to recognize the rightful place of Congress in the American political system. He's impeached. The matter that precipitates impeachment is this violation of the Tenure of Office Act, right? He fires a general. Lincoln had been hiring and firing generals left and right during the course of the war, and nobody really complained about it because it was seen as necessary during the course of wartime. Johnson tries to do this in the post-war period, and the Congress says, you may not do this. He does it anyway, and they say, that's it. We're not going to have a dictator in the United States. We're returning back to a constitutional period of normalcy, and that's it for you. They impeached him, darn near kicked him out of office over this, okay? The impulses in the post-war period are precipitously to return to the status quo ante bellum. It is, let's get back to this state of constitutional equipoise. We're not going to have a heroic leader anymore. Same thing happens in World War I, right? Woodrow Wilson, who can tell you how much sugar you can put in your coffee, who controls vast empires of commercial enterprises in the country to create a war machine, who controls armies he can send abroad, gets to 1918 and he starts looking at a confluence of two events. The movement towards an armistice and peace in Europe and the 1918 midterm elections in Congress. He thinks, if I can't maintain Democratic majorities in both houses of Congress, I'm not going to be able to lead the nation in peacetime. He goes to the American people in October and he says, please send me Democrats in Congress so that I can continue my leadership of the world as we promote a peaceful world. and the American people refuse it. They send, for a rare moment in American history, they at a presidential midterm, reverse control of both houses of Congress. Both the House and the Senate become Republicans. Why? Because they conceived that Wilson was trying to exercise wartime leadership into a post-war period. Right? Then he tries to move us into a League of Nations. We're going to design a peaceful world. What happens with that? Strong congressional opinion. He practically puts himself into an early grave raging against this kind of congressional opinion. What happens in 1920? Warren Harding is elected. What's his campaign theme? Return to normalcy. The impulses immediately after war precipitously to bring the presidency back down to size. Same thing happens after World War II. Most of us remember Harry Truman as being somebody who was fairly powerful. That's the Cold War Harry Truman after 1946, 1947. The immediate post-war Harry Truman is a small figure who's under constant duress by Congress, who are rushing back in to reclaim their constitutional prerogatives after the end of World War II. If you look at the contemporaneous press accounts, the New York Times is writing here within weeks after the Japanese surrender that Truman will no longer be able to exercise any kind of political leadership because now that the war's over, nobody wants to listen to him. All right. So the general effect in American history has been we empower presidents to deal with crisis. We're glad that they succeed, but immediately upon that success, we're going to tear that institution back down to size because we need a functioning political system in which Congress has a role, the courts have a role, the American people have a role.